All right. All right. Good afternoon. This is Brenda Bartlett, Chair of the Oregon Board of Accountancy Peer Review Oversight Committee, PROC, and I call this public meeting of our committee to order at 1:03 p.m. via Zoom on Thursday, August 29th, 2024. This meeting is open to the public and is being recorded. The purpose of the PROC is to provide oversight of the administration of approved peer review programs in order to provide reasonable assurance that peer reviews of Oregon licensees are conducted and reported in accordance with the minimum standards for performing and reporting on peer reviews. PROC will review and submit to the board for approval peer review programs that comply with the minimum standards for performing and reporting on peer reviews. PROC will provide oversight of approved peer review programs to the board. PROC will comply with all other requirements as provided for in OAR 801 Division 050. In the performance of duties as a member of a committee appointed by the board, all committee members will support the mission, goals, and values of the board. Committee members will not disclose confidential information that comes to their attention during the course of carrying out their responsibilities. Requests to any committee member for copies of public information or for a public statement relating to committee or board matters will be referred to the executive director. Board and committee members are expected to attend all meetings and be prepared for the discussion by reading the agenda material prior to the meeting. Committee members are expected to participate in the individual review of applicant files as assigned, providing timely notification to the committee coordinator if a potential conflict of interest exists. Likewise, committee members must provide timely notification to the committee coordinator of any conflict of interest in any matters to be discussed. Members of the committee, please remember to mute your microphones during the meeting to avoid unnecessary background noise, and do not use the chat room feature for any discussions. When you want to speak, you may unmute yourself and state your name prior to speaking. Should any technical issues arise, we will pause the meeting until they are resolved. We will now take roll of all participating members and guests. For any participating guests, please identify yourself at the end. So committee members, Brenda Bartlett, that's me, I'm here. John Howell. I'm sorry, I can't see because I'm looking at my script.
I needed to unmute. I'm present.
Yeah, just for the record, I think we need to say we're here. Let's see, Kim Conway.
Here.
Pamela Albright.
Here.
Carrie Ott.
I'm here, and that's my phone number on the screen because I can't get my microphone to work.
Okay, thank you. And let's see. So sorry, I lost my script again. There it is. Okay, and then our board liaison, Haley Lyons.
Here.
Okay. And the board staff. Well, let's start with our OSCPA peer review program representative, Darlene Bowles.
Here.
And then we have board staff via Zoom, Martin Pidioni.
Present by Zoom.
And Andrew Barlow. Did we lose Andrew? Oh, he's there.
He's there, but we can't hear him.
Okay.
Present by Zoom.
Thank you. All right, and then it does appear that we have a guest. Mary Lynn?
They're board staff.
Okay, so I don't have that name on my list. I'm sorry. Okay, so Mary Lynn Barner, is that right?
Yes.
Yep, present.
Thank you. Okay, great. All right. So I didn't see any guests present by Zoom or at the office. So let's proceed to review and approval of the draft agenda. Looks like we do have a quorum. So after review of the agenda, does anybody have any items for discussion or any proposed changes to the agenda? So should we do a motion and adopt this agenda?
Yes, please.
Hey. Anybody have a motion?
I'll make the motion to accept the agenda.
I second it.
All right. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
I,
Members, passed unanimous, the adoption of the agenda. And I still do not see anybody here for public comment, but this is the time for that. So we'll open public comment and close public comment. Okay. All right. So agenda item number 4 is old business. And Martin was going to give us a status report on that request for CPE credit.
Yeah, and I'll just do that very briefly. So where we're at now is, I'll be honest that the Laws and Rules Committee of the board is right now super focused on the legislative side because that's where we're preparing for the 2025 session. That said, there are 2 items here that are specific to that CPE credit request. One is I did give our chair, Jason Orm, a heads up that that request has been made by the PROC, and I'm working with our chair of the board, Joe Sullivan, to actually take this up as a broader policy discussion, because I remember from roughly about a decade ago, at the board level, there was a discussion back then about whether the board would want to move, not for PROC specific, but in general for things like board service, committee service, towards CPE credit for that type of service. At that time, the board did not feel comfortable going there. However, I think it's really timely to revisit that piece. So my plan is, instead of bringing this directly to the LRC and then finding out kind of maybe the board is or isn't on board with the policy piece, this one made sense to me to essentially set up first as a kind of just a fundamental policy discussion at the board level, if the board is willing to change course on this more broadly. Because if the answer is yes, it can then instruct the Laws and Rules Committee to basically come up with a specific rules proposal. And that seemed to me to be just the easiest and most straightforward way to kind of take up that request from the PROC, kind of under that little bit of that broader umbrella. So what I anticipate here is keeping that agenda item up for us at the PROC. So at the November PROC, whenever we end up scheduling it for, because that's a separate issue later on the agenda about whether we keep that on November 5. I would want to come back and either myself or with Haley, with Haley's help as board liaison, kind of update how that discussion went at the board level and kind of when we can anticipate, depending on what the outcome is, kind of when the LRC can take that up. So that's essentially current state.
Okay, thank you, Martin. We'll move that to an ongoing discussion and revisit in November. That works for everybody. All right, perfect.
So it doesn't get dropped or lost.
Yeah, okay. Moving on to new business, 5A, I wanted to talk about reviewing the prop calendar. I do have a question. I didn't see the prop calendar attached to our email that I sent to you, Martin.
Oh, well, that would probably be my fail, which I seem to have been somewhat proficient at when it comes.
Okay. I just want to be sure that wasn't something we couldn't have out, because I know that I think it'll be helpful for everybody. So could we send that out to everybody just as a just after the meeting when you have time? So we do have a calendar. There's not a lot on it, but it just does have the rest of the RAB meetings and the AICPA meetings and our meetings. And possibly, Martin, since it didn't go out, maybe hold it until I can revise it to talk about our November meeting. So maybe don't shoot it out now. But so I'm trying to keep that so that you guys have, just kind of an idea of what's coming up. just so we can all be on the same page. So we'll get that out to you after this meeting, probably tomorrow, hopefully. But the first thing I wanted to, I'm planning on attending the September 20th RAB meeting. We have we have several that are unassigned. So we've got one in October, one in November, and one in December. The October 18th, the meeting we need a volunteer for, it is from 10 to 1. Any takers on that?
I can go ahead and take that. This is Pamela Parks.
All right, thank you. And then let's just finish the RAB. November 22nd, there's a 9 to noon meeting.
I can do that one.
That's Kim. Okay. And then we have December 20th, which is doesn't sound like a very fun one, everybody. You
I
got
can
that,
do
John?
that unless somebody else would like to go.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's those of us that are here, we've got us, 1, 2, 3, 4, starting with you, Brenda. So I think that it's fair that I take it unless somebody else volunteers.
Okay. That sounds great. Thanks. Thanks everybody for volunteering. And then I'm going to pop right back up to this AICPA. So when the last time I checked it, I'm on tap for that. But it looked like maybe they moved it and it's now at the same time. I think it was later in the month, maybe around the 20th, but I could be wrong. But it is the same day and time-ish of our November 5th board meeting. So what I'd like to talk about is perhaps changing the date of our board meeting so that I can attend. I know we've attended one, but I'd like to at least make sure we've got a couple in the committee attending for our annual report. So any thoughts on that?
Or is the committee open to moving our proc basically 1 week later, like from the 5th to the 12th? Would that work?
Work for
Yeah.
me.
That works for me.
Works for me.
Me too. Okay. Okay, good.
I think
So
I can.
do we need to do a resolution for changing a date, Martin? Or like a motion? We don't, do we?
I don't think we need it. I don't think we need it. So I'm going to are we doing a 1 p.m. thing or are we doing something else that day while I have everyone's attention on their calendars riveted on November 12th?
Does 1 o'clock work for everybody? It works for me.
Works for me.
Works for me.
It works for me.
Perfect.
Fair warning to my staff, Marilyn and Andrew, I will be able to be there at 1, but I will have, there's a significant possibility I will have to step out by 2. And that should not be a problem holding anything up. Just want to make sure folks are aware.
Okay. And so then I can attend that November 5th AICPA peer reviewed board meeting. I think I was scheduled to, but just wanted to make sure we could. So I'll update the calendar for that. And we will send out a calendar either today or tomorrow. Probably tomorrow, right, Martin? Give us a little time. But yeah, I'll get that updated into Martin and we'll get it out to everybody.
Okay.
So item 5B, just wanted to get some brief reports from everybody on their attendance at the various meetings that we have. And I have, first off, I have, let's see, the May 17th RAB and the May 15th peer review board committee.
That's me.
Mhm.
So the RAB meeting I thought was very similar comments to everything that the other board members have said. They do a really good and thorough job. It was really insightful. I thought it was very educational for me to sit through it. So that's kind of all my comments on that one. I sent the agenda as a follow-up, so I have a copy of it if anyone really wants to look at it. And then when I attended the AICPA peer review board meeting, it was a very quick meeting, 40 minutes, and their main topic of conversation was just resolving an issue they have with firms practicing in multiple jurisdictions and making sure that those firms are in compliance with the peer review standards of each jurisdiction. And so they're putting together like this, I guess, large spreadsheet that firms can reference, what the various rules are for each state. And I guess there's a lot of discrepancies among all the states. I was learning that. And I didn't know, is that something that, like, who from Oregon reaches out to that national board and says, hey, these are our requirements and this is how we make sure that firms are who are crossing jurisdictions are in compliant with our peer review standards. And I didn't know if that was like a RAB thing or if that was an us thing. It was just a question I had.
That's a great question. And I'm wondering if Darlene can help a little bit with this from the OSCPA side as the AICPA program administrator, because I'll be honest, just, at the risk of disappointing the living daylights out of everybody here on the committee, but I'm not aware of the Oregon board having had conversations of that nature with that entity. So just want to say that loud and clear, but I'm hoping that now that I said it, that Darlene is going to be the hero and come right to my rescue.
So each firm has to have an administering entity. So Oregon, we administer peer reviews from Oregon and Hawaii, but we could have a firm that, say, from, I don't know, Idaho, that wanted Oregon to administer their peer review. So then we would be in charge of that firm. But it's really all governed by which state or which group of states, because some of the peer reviews that have multiple states in one administering entity. But the key is your administering entity. So you're gonna have one administering entity that's gonna shepherd that whole process through. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess the concern was that if an out-of-state firm is doing a review on someone in Oregon, then shouldn't the Oregon board have access to their peer review, even though it's done in another state? Do we have access to see what their report is? Are they pass fail?
If it's an Oregon firm, they would need to be, they have to submit to the Board of Accountancy. They don't, it doesn't matter if there's an out-of-state firm that's doing the peer review. Because if their firm registration is in Oregon, then the Oregon Board of Accountancy is the one that's governing their license.
So if a Washington firm does a review on an Oregon client, do we get a copy of the report?
If the firm is an Oregon firm, yeah, it doesn't matter where the peer reviewer is coming from. If we're administering the entity and their license is coming from Oregon, you would get a notification of what their report rating is.
But their license it would be coming from Washington because they're a Washington firm.
Yeah, so their peer review, if it's through the AICPA, would be available to the Oregon Board of Accountancy because that's in the public file. If it was in a private program, or if it was in a program that wasn't the AICPA peer review program, like our old Oregon program, as we called it, I think that the firm would actually have to send, let's say that I was in the Oregon program and I wanted to do an audit of a client in Idaho. What I would have to do then is contact the Idaho board, say, what are your registration requirements? I want to do an audit of a company in Boise. And usually there, I think they just say, well, if your peer review isn't in the public file, then we want you to maybe complete this application and send us your peer review report. So Idaho would ask that to grant the privilege of conducting A&A work in Idaho, but not all of them require you to, the states are all different. Some of them require you to actually be licensed in the state, and other states go, no, we'll just grant you practice privilege. And California will do the thing where you can do one audit in California for $1,000, but not have to actually register in California. You pay a little $1,000 fee to the California Board of Accountancy, and you can do an audit, say, of somebody in Sacramento if you want. So I mean, if you're based in Oregon, you're not a California firm. So that's what I've seen out there. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I was just curious what the practice was.
Yeah, and it varies. You kind of have to call each state. I had a client that wanted me to do one a couple of years ago for a nonprofit in Tennessee, and I had to call the Tennessee board and go, okay, what do I need to do? Right. I mean, I want to be on the right side of the state law. And so I called them and they said, okay, well, you need to do this, this, and this. And so then we did those things and submitted the audit report and moved on.
Good. Well, that was the main topic at that board meeting. So that's all for me.
Okay. So June 21st, Rob, Kim?
That was me. I would echo Pamela's statements and John's via email. I think maybe the one thing that was unique about that RAB meeting was that we had an observer from the AICPA, and so he seemed very knowledgeable, very engaged in the process, was interacting with the RAB committee members and asking questions, kind of as they were engaging in their conversations. So again, as far as kind of our observations of the general oversight of the AICPA piece, it seemed appropriate and very engaging in that regard.
So I'm just a quick question, Kim, and I'm assuming it's not confidential. So if it's confidential, then forget the question. Do we by any chance know who it was from the AICPA? Do you remember?
I can look it up.
I was going to say Darlene might be a better
Okay.
resource. I'm
Mhm.
sure I
Darlene
have it
probably knows.
somewhere, but
I'm just trying to kind of get a little bit of a feel for does what AICPA side a little bit more. So I'm just curious. Not
Which meeting was that again?
June 21st.
June 21st.
June 21st. Lavon Montague.
okay. Thanks.
Mhm. And the way those AICPA observations work, just for background, we get observed probably 3 times a year by the AICPA. And they get the RAB packet ahead of time. They go through and look at the peer reviews that are in there. And when they join our meeting, they give us a selection of peer reviews. So they'll pick maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 off of the list. And the RAB will just go through their discussion processes. We can make a motion, we can second a motion, but before they get to the all in favor, say aye, we flip it over to the RAB observer and they have a chance to make all of their comments ahead of time. And the reason that they wait that late in the process is because they're checking to see if, say, we're going to assign corrective actions or whatever, they have to be appropriate and they have to be in accordance with the standards. So they want us to get all the way to the process where we're ready to vote, and then we back off, and then, Andrew or Lavon or whoever it is will either say, I don't have any comments, or they'll have a comment, or they'll have a further question, blah, blah, blah. So the AICPA gets to weigh in before the RAB then, does the final vote to accept the peer review.
Have they ever changed, in your experience, have they ever changed the minds? I mean, have they ever brought up something that maybe people haven't considered and maybe, or do you just not know because nobody's voted yet?
The AIC, I mean, I can only speak to the last 4 years, but the AICPA person does not change the mind of the RAB member. I mean, the RAB
Right.
has the authority to,
Right.
you know, if they try to assign corrective actions that are not allowed under the standards,
Mm.
they will, say you can't do that because it's not in the standards, but our technical reviewers are usually all over that. And that's also something that I'm watching because I have the standards open, because if it's a engagement review or a system review and there's a repeat or there's not a repeat or whatever, I mean, you have to kind of follow the flow chart down. And if you're in this column, these are the only things that you can assign for a corrective action or an implementation plan. And if you try to veer out of that and jump into the other column, the technical reviewer will usually say, well, that's not allowed under the standards. Or if it's being observed, the AICPA observer would say, that's not allowed under the standards. But our RAB is usually pretty on top of that. So, and then I'm the backstop if they try to do something, like on some of these things where there's like a three-peat on a consecutive non-pass, the RAB's trying to say, but why can't we assign this as a corrective action? It's like, because it's not in the standards. So anyway, that's how that process works, just for everybody's information.
You. Awesome. And then, Martin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think John's summary needs to come into the record. Is that true?
Yes, so that's the other piece. I was trying to figure out kind of how to say that here in a public meeting, but basically, it would actually be best. And John, I'm actually would appreciate if, since it's coming from you, if you'd actually be the one doing it. So I'm happy to do it as well. But essentially, under public meetings law, right? The reason why I asked for, hey, please don't do a reply all, is because essentially, what you sent back was substantively really helpful, but we need to kind of push it into the public meeting context under Oregon public meetings law. So essentially what it means is, I had this happen once before at a different, I forget what the context is, Haley may remember, but I had this happen in some other committee or at the board level once before. And then essentially the way board counsel asked me to quote unquote cure it, to use legal language, is that we would read what was essentially sent out to the committee outside the public meeting into the record at the public meeting. And that's essentially the way that we then allow the public to observe essentially all and get it into the recording, because remember, we don't have minutes. So actually the recordings of these meetings also serve as our official record, right? So the way we fix it is we actually literally read into the record what you laid out.
Yeah.
John, do you mind just doing that?
No, I don't mind doing that at all. So if you want me to go ahead, I mean, it was in reference to my report on the August 2nd RAB meeting. And I just commented it was an interesting one. And I'll talk about it to the extent I can in the public meeting, given the confidentiality agreement that we have. One review was deferred pending additional questions back to the technical reviewer and then to the peer reviewer team captain. I think, to me, this feels like a pretty infrequent occurrence, as the matters are usually addressed by the technical reviewer's questions matters and then resolved by the team captain before the review is presented to the RAB. So by the time they get to the RAB, I think things have been pretty well wrapped up, and there's the back and forth between the technical reviewer and the team captain. And then there's a presentation done at the RAB. And so usually there aren't any open items, other than there is discussion about different things that come up. So this particular peer review and its resolution need to be followed up by our committee's observer at the next RAB meeting, which is Brenda, at the September 20th. So I'll pause there with what's in the email and just kind of go to that information now, because the email was just saying, the remainder of the email was how much I enjoyed the RAB meeting, how impressed I was with the knowledge of the RAB members and their dedication to the peer review process. I feel like I learn a lot at these meetings, and I learn a lot about our own peer review. I think it's super valuable to someone in my position in a small firm that's trying to run our own QC program to really understand what people do. I think it's a lot more valuable than a lot of the CPE that I've attended on audit and audit risk. And I mentioned Walter Haig, and I don't think that there's any secret on that in a public meeting. He's a big name purveyor, but I have ceased to enjoy his police stories and disciplinary action recounting that he does at his things, because what we're all looking for as practitioners is how do we do things the right way. I really don't want to hear how somebody else went to jail. I want to hear how to avoid jail myself. And so I said, you know, I've nothing I've hated more than having to talk my less experienced staff off of the cliff after attending one of his scare meetings, you know, that auditing's too dangerous to do. You know, it's like, no, it isn't. It isn't. You know, the purpose of CPE is not to make you quit and leave the profession. You know, I don't ever want you to do that or say, oh, I only want to be a tax person. I never want to do auditing again. So I think that this is a great opportunity for people. I love that we've all gotten rotated onto the RAB meetings. Maybe they aren't all as interesting as this one, but that being said, that was I've paraphrased my email, but that was the gist of the email. I haven't missed anything substantive there on that. And thank you for the explanation, Martin. I will, in the future, be very brief in my responses to the emails. Okay, so to return to this one, this was actually started out as what I felt was a very routine meeting. There were 11 reviews, 8 of them were engagement reviews, and only 3 of them were system reviews. The engagement reviews were, for the most part, pretty small firms. You know, they're just doing compilation review. These were all but one were consecutive pass firms. All of them passed this time. All of them were consecutive pass firms. So really nothing that, you know, that's the system working, and nothing really controversial here at all. It's interesting, though, super interesting to listen to the FFCs and the MFCs, because when you see some of these things, you know, the feeling I'm having is I'm listening to these, it's like, oh, thank God we do that, right? You know, that theoretically couldn't happen at our firm because we have this safeguard in place. And so it was really interesting from that perspective to kind of listen to some of these reports. The one that I did want to call to the attention for Brenda's follow-up, this was a systems review. It was a fairly substantial audit practice, so it was not a small audit practice. It was a consecutive pass. Their prior implementation plan just says CPE on risk assessment and post-issuance review. Then just some of the notes in here on this one was the firm had been dropped from the peer review program for failed to schedule its peer review timely. The firm re-enrolled in December 23, and the peer review was extended to 5/31, and it got done, and then it was presented at this meeting. You know, I don't want to disagree with the RAB, but I mean, I think that that's, you know, a tone at the top thing, right? You're a larger firm, and nobody remembered to you know, go on Prima and schedule your review. It's a little strange. I mean, I've gotten the letters, you know, where I didn't respond immediately to them, you know, and of course my business partner is like, are you going to take care of this, John? I mean, are you serious? You didn't register when you got the first email from you know, from the peer review program. So anyway, I found that was a little bit interesting. The gist of this one, though, which is why it was referred back, is there was a concern that the technical reviewer had about one of the team captain's comments in the exit conference, where it had to do with revenue recognition not being considered a presumed fraud risk, and this was fairly broad, and it was documented as to why the firm thought that. Team captain's ultimate response was their auditor judgment allowed them to come to that conclusion. And it's like, okay, on every engagement in a large audit practice, revenue recognition's never a presumed fraud risk. And I didn't see their documented as to why or their justification for it, but I thought that this was interesting. And then, so this is what the RAB felt should be referred back to, you know, and I think it deserves follow-up at our I mean, I'm interested to hear at our next meeting, you know, what the resolution of it was. I mean, I do think it's a pass rating. They had, you know, FFCs. It was just this sort of fundamental kind of thing that, you know, there is a certain amount of auditing that's, I mean, our standards are very explicit on risk assessment and everything now, you know, that you have to consider fraud risk and you have to document your considerations. And that was done here. But, you know, it's also a sense that I get here, well, that the auditor's judgment would be absolute. And it's like, yes, absolute in each individual audit, not absolute broadly across all audits. It's it feels a little strange to me. So I'm very intrigued in what the RAB's follow-up on this is, Brenda. So I wanted to bring that one to your attention. I find that unusual, you know, from our standpoint, and I'll just speak then to what our firm does is, you know, clearly anything where there is a possibility or a potential for management override has to be considered at least a moderate fraud risk, right? There's a fraud risk there and you have to address it. Revenue recognition is a common area of frauds, right? So in your audit brainstorm, you have to go through and you go, how could this company commit a fraud with revenue recognition? You know, how would it be done? Has there ever been any history of material error, whether or not from fraud, in their revenue recognition? And so, you know, that's one of those things that where I'm just sort of reading this, I'm like, yeah, how could you? I would be afraid to go into a peer review and present this to my peer reviewer and say, this is our firm judgment. I would be afraid, but maybe that's just me. So anyway, I'm very interested in that. But the other thing that I think that was really instructive about this is there's limitation to what peer review can do, right? They're limited by the standards. And if something is auditor judgment, that's clear-cut auditor judgment, which I believe this is, you know, there's limitations on what you can do. You can say, well, I wouldn't come to that same judgment. In fact, I just said that. I wouldn't come to the same judgment, but you can't really call out someone else for arriving at a different judgment than you did from the same fact pattern. So it's interesting. Like I say, I'll be interested in hearing the resolution of it. It may be a little bit, from what I've heard from other people and all the other RAB meetings I've been to, that's kind of unprecedented that a pass rating gets presented and then it gets deferred for further questions, because the technical reviewers do a really, really good job on this stuff. So I found it interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I made some notes so I can report back in November if there's a resolution to that. Okay. All right, any comments, questions on any of our reporting out for the RAB or the peer review board? Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna move on to 5C. So first of all, I'm very, very sorry. This is part my fault and part the fault of email spam, right, Martin? That
Yeah.
we didn't get these cases out to you sooner. So I'm trying to get it on my radar on a calendar to trigger Andrew to pull these for us for our meetings so that we can have them a couple weeks in advance. I think that would be ideal. These two looked pretty minor, these consecutive non-pass. I don't want to say minor, I want to say not a lot of work to have to slog through, very easy to read. So I read them, you know, a little bit before this meeting, but I wanted the group to know that it's definitely on my radar to get these a little bit earlier. And here's my question for the group. What is your general feel for your timing of what would be ideal? Because if we're too far out, it might go and then all of a sudden it's the meeting and you've forgotten to read it anyway. But what are your thoughts on what that timeline might look like? Because what we really should ideally be doing is reading these and being prepared for discussion. But we need to have that time right before the meeting. Does that make sense? Anybody have
I
any
would say a
thoughts
week.
on that? Hi, Gary. Do you have a thought or comment?
Yeah, I would just say a week would be plenty for me.
Everybody
I'd
else
agree
good?
with that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, good. That was my gut feel too, honestly, because anything further out, I'm gonna put it aside and then I might forget about it. It's just, that's just how I roll. So, okay, so we're gonna shoot for a week. And so that means I will get to, Andrew, if I get it to you a week before we want the committee to have it, will that be enough? Or how much time do you need to gather? Oh, you're on mute still.
It takes less than an hour.
Okay. What would be your preference for when you have it?
2 weeks,
Okay. 2 weeks before the meeting or 2 weeks before you need to get it out?
2 weeks before a meeting, a week before it goes out.
Okay, perfect.
And we can calendar that internally too, quite frankly. So just in the interest of full disclosure here, so that there is kind of no confusion kind of on the committee side in terms of kind of some of the stuff you see down the road, right? I want to be just super honest that because of a whole bunch of just internal stressors that I don't want to bother any of our committees with, right? We've had a lot of just vacancies and staffing changes and all this other stuff, right? You've seen me do a lot of stuff directly with committees that I should actually hand off to staff, and you're going to start seeing that because it's normally actually staff that sends out things like invites and helps with agendas and all that stuff. So I've been doing a lot of that directly, in part to free up staff to help us deal with our capacity issues. So we're actually trying to get back to we're starting to be in a much better place post renewal season and other positive changes. So you're going to start seeing Marilyn, who's actually assigned to this committee, kind of take on some of that day-to-day stuff. That also means things like scheduling this internal stuff, so that really shouldn't have to come from you, Brenda. We should be able to self-calendar. Hey, we need to pull this stuff 2 weeks before the meeting, and hey, we should check in with you if we don't have an agenda from you, within X amount of time, so that it's not just sleepy time on our end and it's all on you. We need to do a better job supporting you as chair, Brenda, right? And so that's all part of the normalization that I hope will come down the road there. And one of the reasons there have been some bumps and bruises with this meeting is because that's what happens when I try to kind of overprotect a little bit, and I get in trouble with my own juggle, and then I end up not doing as good of a job as we should supporting you, Brenda. So I'm trying to kind of level that, and we can build that piece in really also from our side as well. And I'll follow up internally with Marilyn and Andrew just as part of that, so that because you shouldn't feel as much pressure. You do a great job, but you shouldn't feel under all that pressure all on you to calendar this and figure all. That's kind of my perspective.
Okay, it looks like we might have lost Kim. We lose Kim? Do we still have a quorum? 4 out of 6? We still good?
Yes.
I'm sure she'll be back, but I don't see her anymore. So, okay. All right. So given that, this is our agenda item for taking a look at the 2 consecutive non-passes that Andrew did gather for us. And they appear to be engagement reviews, not system reviews. And that's why I was saying a little bit easier to get through, not as much information. Did everybody have a chance to get through these? We've got A and we've got B.
I skimmed them really quick.
Yeah, me too. So I'm just gonna start off and say my skim of it, I actually thought it was interesting. I thought maybe number A would probably be a little bit more corrective action than I would have been on. So I feel like they did a great job. I didn't see anything that caused me any concern in either one of them. They seemed to be fairly minor issues. I am wondering though, if maybe something on A, and I'm going to ask, maybe Andrew can help us here. Because I think these are first time, it looks like we're supposed to be looking at consecutive non-passes.
Correct.
And so I didn't know if it was,
non-pass.
I'm sorry?
We did not have any consecutive
Okay.
non-pass.
So I don't think that we're supposed to review these then. I wasn't sure if something was wrong on the notes and it really was not consecutive non-passes. So we're charged with looking at consecutive non-passes. So I think for us that those are the ones we look at. And so these are, I just want to confirm that these are first time non-passes other than B, which had a fail in 2018, but so that's correct. This is just first time non-pass. Okay.
Right.
All right. So really nothing for us on this agenda, and we can move on. All right. Let's see. So I did want to start thinking about the drafting the PROC annual report. What we decided the last time was that we will have the first draft ready at our November meeting. We had already decided that the content from last year was still acceptable. And I think we decided at the last meeting, we were all happy with that. We didn't want to add to the content. And then we had decided our timing would be finalizing that by our January PROC meeting to get it to the board in February. So I just wanted to find out if anybody's interested in volunteering for that. I don't mind doing it. It didn't take too long last year at all. It's pretty brief, just kind of taking notes and such, but also don't want to hog all the fun stuff myself. So I don't know if anybody's interested. Okay, doesn't sound like there's any takers. So I'm perfectly fine with just kind of drafting that, and we'll look at it in November, get some suggestions, do that, and then plan to finalize it in January. And then if we decide as a group to make it a little bit bigger and broader, then I think it would be really appropriate to just assign parts. But as of now, it's pretty small. I think it was maybe 5 pages. So hard to assign parts at this point, but I think, yeah, I'm good with that.
Hey, Brenda, would you, part of the earlier comments that I made about normalization, be open to us drafting it at the staff level and sending it to you so you have something to get started with? Because there's certain pieces that we know how to update in there. So I do think that's actually something we could do.
That's definitely something we could, I think that would be a great idea going forward. But yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I would, when you're asking earlier for the help with it, I wouldn't mind doing that if I would have kept track of all of our benchmarking, how many RAB meetings we've observed, the AICPA meetings, just kind of because really the reports, this is what we did, right? This is what we did to carry out our legislative mandate. To monitor the peer review program. And that's why I'd just be looking for that benchmarking information in the report. We had members attend, every RAB meeting, and there were 8. And, there were, X number of reviews done total at those RAB meetings. And if Martin and the staff have those statistics in there, at least if they could get our benchmarks in there, that would be great. That would be absolutely great.
Yeah, and it's probably something we'd have to start. I've been trying to track it in that calendar we've been talking about.
Yeah.
What I probably haven't updated in the calendar is that, I don't think it was this year. It might have been this year that I tried to do ASCPA and got the date wrong. It might have been 2023. I can't remember. But if somebody missed one that they were scheduled for because of extenuating circumstances, I don't think I've been tracking that. I don't think you guys are tracking that either, Martin. So maybe just something we think about tracking. I'm tracking in little pieces of paper.
Yeah.
No.
I think we can start kind of on a go forward basis to really do that tracking, because we have it, reported at the meetings themselves, that we just have the staff track it. It will be a little bit of a chore figuring it out for this year, because I'm not gonna.
Yeah. I think I probably have it for this year, honestly. I've been trying to track it because I know it's going to show up in the report.
But
so
I
we
do
don't really have a mechanism. So, but yes, I love the idea of getting a mechanism started with staff doing that, because it is reported out. I since we don't have minutes, I just sort of take notes and keep them, and then I can kind of tell what was going on. So So yeah, I think that would be a great goal to get started with next year, the tracking.
Hmm.
So
Awesome.
I will put that on an upcoming agenda. Just to get that settled. Okay, so 5E, our last new business agenda item. We are in November. We do need to have the leadership elections. Martin, help me out on this one. I don't know what the process is or what we should all be prepared for.
So, and that's a great question. And fortunately, there isn't a lot of rigor to all of this, right? So in general, what it means is that anyone can nominate either someone else or themselves for either chair or vice chair, right? And in essence, as the current chair, you, Brenda, would have to preside over essentially figuring out, hey, do we have more than one nomination, right? Then we have to do kind of voting, nominations, and kind of figure out our way through that process if we have more than one candidate for the positions. But we do need to do it at the end of the November PROC meeting so that we have essentially an updated leadership slate in place beginning with a January PROC and kind of have it aligned with our calendar year.
Okay. And how often, just for future, how often is it every year?
Yeah. It doesn't mean that there has to be a change. So there is no requirement that essentially old leadership has to go. It's very much up to the committee in terms of how you do that. There is no restrictions. There is no, hey, you can only be chair for 1 year or you can only be chair for 2 years. It's a lot. It's a pretty relaxed piece, and it really is up to the committee to kind of figure out what works well for the committee. Right. The only requirement, at the risk of stating the super obvious, is that you need to be a member of the PROC to be in the leadership. So just saying, but that's probably.
Right. So if anybody's expiring in January, they wouldn't.
Yes.
I don't think anybody is, so. Okay. And then the only other thing upcoming that's on our agenda is this will be for our January meeting. We decided to revisit that. Back in November 2023, there was a consecutive non-pass firm after they had completed their requirements from the RAB. So I'm just leaving that on there till January so we don't forget.
Yeah, and I loved you putting that on there because that goes right along with the tracking piece. And quite frankly, I think that to me, this piece actually highlights that when we talk about tracking and the kind of tracking that needs to be done for an effective PROC, it isn't just for the calendar. It's also about making sure that when we have these things identified, that we put them essentially on a PROC tracking calendar so that they don't fall off the calendar and that we don't need to realize, as beautiful as it is to have you on top of that, Brenda, but it should be a little bit more kind of institutionalized. So I would actually say that we need to make sure that at the staff level we track, hey, the PROC said we need to do this and we need to follow up with this, with these cases after RAB completion, and have that calendared. It basically docketed, if you will.
Yeah, so yeah, we're making baby steps here, right? All right, so does anybody have anything that they would like to see on future event agendas that you would like me to add to November discussion, or any announcements or any comments that you'd like to share? All right, well, then I believe I will adjourn the August 29th PROC committee meeting at 1:58 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.